Jonathan Gray had always been a man of quiet precision. Born into a family of watchmakers in a sleepy English town, his life revolved around gears, springs, and the delicate ticking of time. His father taught him the craft when he was a boy, and by the time he turned 16, Jonathan could repair even the most intricate mechanisms blindfolded. But unlike his peers who sought the glamour of innovation, Jonathan found solace in preserving the old. He believed that every clock had a soul, and fixing one was like reviving a piece of history. After his father passed away, Jonathan moved to the city, searching for work and purpose. It was then he found his place at the central bank, a towering institution that housed not only wealth but also history. The bank's grand halls were adorned with vintage timepieces, from ornate pendulum clocks to intricate pocket watches displayed in glass cases. Jonathan quickly became the bank's trusted clock repairman, caring for their collection with reverence. For over 20 years, he walked the same polished marble floors, greeted the same guards, and meticulously maintained the bank's clocks. His favorite was the grand old clock in the central hall, towering over everyone. Its ornate golden frame and Roman numerals made it a symbol of the bank's prestige. Jonathan often joked that it was the only thing keeping time honest in a place where fortunes could change with a single trade. Despite his years at the bank, Jonathan lived a humble life. His small workshop above a cafe in the city's quieter quarter was filled with ticking sounds, the air rich with the scent of oil and polish. His evenings were spent reading dusty manuals on antique mechanisms or sketching blueprints of the timepieces he hoped to restore one day. He rarely ventured out. Time, both literally and figuratively, was his only companion. The grand clock in the bank's main hall was more than just a timekeeper. It was a piece of history, an artifact that had watched over the institution for 2 centuries. When it suddenly stopped ticking one rainy morning, the staff was bewildered. For as long as anyone could remember, its steady rhythm had marked the hours without fail. The bank's directors, aware of the clock's symbolic importance, called in Jonathan Gray, the most skilled clockmaker they could find. Jonathan arrived at the bank the following day, his weathered toolkit firmly in hand, the leather strap worn soft from years of use. Without wasting a moment, he made his way to the grand clock that dominated the central hall. The massive timepiece was an imposing structure, towering above the marble floor with an air of quiet majesty. Its outer shell was a masterpiece of artistry, gilded with intricate patterns that caught the light and reflected it in a warm, golden hue. But beneath this ornamental facade lay a complex network of gears, springs, and levers, an elaborate mechanism whose secrets were hidden from the casual observer. Jonathan set to work with practiced precision. His experienced fingers moved deftly over the aged components as he began a careful inspection that would stretch on for hours. Every cogwheel, every pivot, every screw was scrutinized under the flickering glow of his lamp. Then, amid the familiar sights of polished brass and iron, he spotted something unusual, a small metallic wedge lodged deep within the gears. It was not a stray fragment or a piece of accidental debris that might have found its way inside over time. No, this wedge appeared to have been placed there deliberately, with purpose and intent, perhaps decades ago, if not longer. The presence of this wedge immediately piqued Jonathan's curiosity and sent a ripple of unease through his mind. But what captivated him even more was a discovery made shortly afterward. Beneath layers of accumulated grime and dust on the inner mechanism, Jonathan uncovered a finely etched inscription. The delicate letters spelled out a name and a date, crafted by Edmund Westphal, 1823. The writing was faint but unmistakable, hidden away as though the creator intended it to remain a secret, revealed only to those who looked closely enough. Jonathan's heart skipped a beat as he recognized the name immediately. Edmund Westphal was a figure renowned in horological circles, a celebrated clockmaker of the 19th century, known not just for his skill, but for his elaborate and almost eccentric designs that bordered on the theatrical. Westphal was famous for pushing the boundaries of clockmaking, blending artistry with engineering in ways few dared to attempt. Yet Jonathan found himself perplexed. Why would such a master craftsman deliberately conceal his own name inside the mechanism? It was a strange and uncharacteristic move for a man who was known to proudly flaunt his genius and craftsmanship. Carefully, Jonathan scribbled the name and date into his worn notebook, tucking the thought away for later while he turned his attention back to the task at hand, repairing the clock. Once the repairs were complete, and the clock resumed its steady, dignified ticking, Jonathan felt a persistent unease. The mystery of the inscription lingered in his mind, refusing to fade. It gnawed at him, a subtle but insistent whisper pulling at the edges of his thoughts. His suspicion deepened when, while examining the clock more thoroughly, he discovered a strange series of grooves hidden behind the clock's faceplate. These grooves looked like tracks or guides, as if the clock's very structure concealed something more, a secret waiting to be uncovered. His curiosity was further fueled by an offhand comment from one of the bank's managers. During a brief conversation, the manager mentioned casually that the vaults beneath the bank had been part of the building since its original construction, a fact Jonathan had not known. The idea that the clock might be connected to something as significant as the vaults planted a seed of suspicion in his mind. Could it really be possible that Edmund Westphal had designed a secret access, a hidden passageway leading directly to the bank's vault? The thought seemed both thrilling and dangerous. Compelled by this tantalizing possibility, Jonathan began to dig deeper into Westphal's life and work. His research uncovered a shadowy tale. Edmund Westphal had died under mysterious circumstances shortly after the clock was installed. His promising career cut tragically short before he could fully achieve the fame and recognition that his later designs might have secured. Adding to the intrigue, Jonathan uncovered whispers among antique collectors and horologists of a legend surrounding Westphal's name. It was said in hushed tones that Westphal had once boasted of creating the ultimate timepiece, not just a clock, but a device that would grant its owner access to unimaginable wealth and secret fortunes. Most dismiss these stories as mere fanciful talk, the exaggerations of a man known for his theatrical flair and love of drama. But Jonathan wasn't so quick to dismiss them. Something about the pieces was starting to fit together, and he was determined to uncover the truth. Driven by curiosity, he tracked down Westphal's descendants, eventually locating a great-great-grandson living in a small town. To his surprise, the man welcomed him warmly and revealed something incredible: a diary passed down through generations, said to contain Edmund's personal musings and unfinished plans. As Jonathan leafed through its yellowed pages, his heart raced. The diary described Westphal's secret. The clock in the central bank was designed as a covert gateway, an elaborate mechanism that would unlock a hidden door leading directly to the bank's lower vaults. Westphal had intended to use it himself, but fate had intervened. Days after the clock's completion, he had died in an accident, struck by a carriage in the streets. The clock's secret, along with his ambitious plan, had died with him. Jonathan sat in his small workshop that evening, the dim glow of a single lamp illuminating Westphal's diary. The words danced on the fragile pages, each one whispering to him of an opportunity that no one else had seen in over 2 centuries. He was a humble craftsman, yes, someone who had spent his life surrounded by ticking gears and worn leather straps. But he was also a man who had struggled to make ends meet, who had quietly borne the weight of modesty while yearning for something more. As he pieced together the details of Westphal's mechanism, the thought began to form. It was simple at first, just a flicker of an idea. What if I could finish what Westphal never could? The plan grew in his mind like the intricate workings of a clock, each detail locking into place. Jonathan would use his access to the clock, a privilege granted only to the trusted, to explore its full mechanism. Over the next few days, he would test the hidden grooves and latches Westphal had described. Once he was sure the secret door could be opened, he would wait for the perfect moment. Late one evening, when the bank was closed and the halls were silent, the risk was undeniable, but so was the reward. Jonathan had seen the vaults during his decades of work for the bank, glimpsed the rows of gilded safety deposit boxes and stacks of cash meant for corporate transfers. If the old tunnel Westphal described still existed and led to a discreet exit, Jonathan could escape without ever setting foot outside the building. The first step was reconnaissance. Over the next week, Jonathan stayed late at the bank under the guise of ensuring the clock's continued performance after the repair. With his familiar face and trusted reputation, no one questioned his presence. He carefully examined the grooves and latches, testing the movements described in the diary. One night, his persistence paid off. The hidden door clicked open with a muffled groan, revealing a narrow, dusty staircase that descended into darkness. Jonathan's heart pounded as he stepped inside with a flashlight. The air was damp and stale, and cobwebs clung to the corners of the stone walls. The tunnel was there, just as Westphal had said, leading away from the bank and toward an unassuming exit in a building several blocks away. An old abandoned carriage house that had long since faded into obscurity. With the escape route confirmed, he moved to the next stage of his plan. The night of the robbery. Jonathan knew the bank's security systems well. The modern cameras and alarms wouldn't notice him in the clock chamber, but the vault itself was another story. He would have to be quick and methodical, taking only what he could carry and leaving no trace of his involvement. He dedicated several long days to meticulous preparation. Every detail mattered. Jonathan carefully studied the security patterns of the bank guards, observing from discreet vantage points how often they walked their rounds, how long they lingered at each checkpoint, and the subtle variations in their schedules. He memorized the timing of their patrols down to the minute, understanding precisely when gaps in surveillance would occur. This knowledge was crucial for his plan to succeed without detection. He also acquired a large duffel bag, one sturdy enough to carry heavy stacks of cash, yet plain and nondescript so as not to attract any undue attention. It was the kind of bag an ordinary tradesman might carry, blending seamlessly into the environment. Alongside that, Jonathan gathered an assortment of specialized tools necessary for bypassing the vault's complex inner locks. Night after night, in the solitude of his workshop, he practiced expertly using lockpicks, small crowbars, and precision drills, honing his dexterity and speed. All the while, he maintained a careful facade. His actions were masked by the image of an eccentric old clockmaker, engrossed in his usual tinkering and repairs. No one suspected the gravity of what was unfolding beneath the surface. Yet despite his meticulous planning and steady hands, a shadow of doubt began to creep into his mind. Could he truly pull this off? Was he, a man who had spent a lifetime living honestly and quietly, really prepared to risk everything for the promise of wealth? The weight of the moral dilemma pressed on him during quiet moments. But then his thoughts returned to Westfall. The brilliance it must have taken to design such an ingenious mechanism, and the dreams that had died along with him so many years ago. Jonathan reminded himself that this was more than just a simple bank robbery. He was completing a legacy, fulfilling the vision of a man who had left a secret behind for someone worthy to find. The final piece of his elaborate plan was timing. He chose a Friday evening, just after the bank closed its doors for the weekend. The city streets would be quiet, the usual bustle replaced by an eerie calm. Any discrepancy in the vault's inventory wouldn't be noticed until the following Monday morning, giving Jonathan ample time to disappear. By then, he would be far away, living a new life with the fortune securely in his possession. With everything in place and his nerves taut with anticipation, Jonathan stood alone in his workshop. The fragile diary containing Westfall's secrets rested on his workbench beside the array of tools he had prepared. It was a quiet moment before the storm. Friday evening finally arrived. The bank's grand doors closed with a heavy thud, signaling the start of the weekend silence. Jonathan lingered behind, as he often did, methodically cleaning his tools and making final adjustments to the clock's delicate mechanisms. To the security guards making their rounds, he was just the harmless old craftsman finishing his workday routine. When the last guard's footsteps faded away after his 8 p.m. check, Jonathan strained to hear the sound of the heavy front door locking into place. The building was empty now, every corridor and hall swallowed by quiet. He waited another hour in near total silence, his nerves stretched tight, mirroring the tension in the finely tuned springs and strings of the clock he had repaired. Then precisely at 9 p.m., Jonathan slipped on a fresh pair of gloves and quietly retrieved the duffel bag he had hidden beneath his workbench. He opened it to reveal the tools he had chosen with care. A small crowbar, a set of delicate lock picks, a powerful but compact flashlight, and a precision drill. Each item was laid out meticulously, ready for the task ahead. With deliberate, practiced movements, he made his way to the grand clock. Using years of experience, he pried open the hidden panel at the back with ease. The soft click of the mechanism was almost comforting, a signal that everything was working as it had in his countless tests. As the panel swung open, the narrow staircase concealed behind the clock's faceplate was revealed once again. The air was damp and heavy as he descended into the darkness below. A faint, earthy smell mingled with the scent of age and neglect as Jonathan's flashlight pierced the blackness. His beam revealed a stone-lined passageway, cold, silent, and seemingly untouched for centuries, that led directly beneath the bank's vault. He paused for a moment, marveling at Westfall's genius. This tunnel was not merely an escape route, It was a secret artery leading right into the heart of the bank's treasure trove. At the end of the passage, Jonathan confronted the final barrier, a rusted metal grate. It had been undisturbed for over 200 years, its bolts corroded and frozen by time. But with steady hands and unwavering focus, Jonathan's drill quickly made work of the ancient fastenings. Carefully, he set the heavy grate aside, revealing the dimly lit vault's lower level beyond. Without hesitation, he climbed into the vault, the weight of what he was about to do pressing on him like the stone walls around him. The vault was a masterpiece of modern security, heavy steel doors, reinforced walls, and biometric locks. But Jonathan's plan didn't rely on brute force or technology. He knew that one section of the vault contained cash ready for corporate transfers, already packaged neatly in bundles. Those packages were kept in reinforced cages with locks, not electronic, but mechanical. Locks he knew he could open. He worked methodically, his hands steady despite his racing heart. The lock clicked open after several tense minutes, and Jonathan slid the cage door aside. Inside were stacks of bills, bound tightly in plastic. He filled his duffel bag carefully, keeping the weight manageable but maximizing the amount he could take. Each bundle was $100,000, and by the time he zipped the bag shut, he'd packed in just over $5 million. He retraced his steps back to the tunnel, his movements quick but deliberate. He could feel the seconds slipping away, each one bringing him closer to the moment when someone might notice the discrepancy. The duffel bag weighed heavily on his shoulder, but adrenaline kept him moving. At the far end of the tunnel, Jonathan emerged into the old carriage house. He'd prepared this exit in advance, clearing away debris and ensuring the old doors could open easily. His escape car was parked just outside, an unassuming vehicle that wouldn't draw attention. He loaded the bag into the trunk and took one last look at the tunnel entrance before sealing the doors behind him. The drive home was surreal. The city streets were quiet, and the weight of his actions began to settle in. He could still smell the damp earth of the tunnel, feel the strain in his muscles from carrying the bag. But when he arrived at his modest apartment, he didn't stop to dwell. Instead, he emptied the bag onto his workbench, counting each bundle with meticulous care. $5.2 million, enough to change his life forever. Jonathan knew he couldn't simply vanish. That would draw suspicion. Instead, he went to work the next morning, as if nothing had happened, wearing the same calm demeanor he always had. But in the back of his mind, he was already crafting the next part of his plan: how to erase any connection to the robbery. He disposed of his tools piece by piece, scattering them in different locations across the city. He scrubbed the workshop clean of any evidence and ensured the diary was burned in his fireplace, its secrets reduced to ash. As for his connection to the clock, he left it repaired and functioning perfectly, an unremarkable relic of history. The bank didn't notice the missing cash until Monday morning, and by then, Jonathan was already blending back into the quiet rhythm of his life. But for the first time in decades, he wasn't counting minutes or pennies. He was counting something far more valuable: freedom. As Jonathan counted the bills in his dimly lit workshop, a rare smile crossed his face. His modest surroundings had never felt more luxurious, knowing they now housed a fortune that could change his life forever. But before he could even begin planning his next move, an unexpected knock at the door shattered his moment of triumph. Startled, Jonathan quickly stashed the duffel bag beneath a loose floorboard. He opened the door to find two men in dark suits and polished shoes standing there. They looked out of place in his humble neighborhood. Too clean, too sharp. One of them spoke, his voice calm yet authoritative. "Mr. Gray, isn't it? We need to talk." Inviting them in cautiously, Jonathan noticed their impeccable attire and lack of badges. They weren't police. One of them introduced himself as Mr. Bellamy, claiming to represent a group with an interest in maintaining discretion about certain events. Jonathan's pulse quickened. "What events?" he asked, feigning innocence. Bellamy smiled, placing a thin folder on the table. Inside were photographs of Jonathan entering the tunnel, blurry but unmistakable. There were also grainy images of him hauling the duffel bag to the carriage house. "You see," Bellamy began, "we knew about the tunnel. In fact, the bank's original architects were aware of its existence. But instead of sealing it off, they decided to use it to their advantage." Jonathan's confusion deepened. Bellamy leaned in closer. "The bank is insured for far more than what you stole. Your little operation helps us claim a hefty payout from the insurance company while keeping the vault inventory intact. But now, We need your cooperation. Bellamy explained the terms bluntly. Jonathan could either agree to work with them on future operations, or they would hand over the evidence to the authorities. They even hinted at how they could manipulate the narrative to portray Jonathan as a master criminal who had been planning the robbery for years. "What do you need me for?" Jonathan asked, his voice trembling. "We're not just after money. There are certain assets, gold, rare documents, jewels, that are much harder to insure. Your skills with mechanisms and discretion make you valuable to us. This isn't just a one-time thing, Gray." Jonathan sat in silence, the weight of the situation crashing down on him. He had thought the hardest part of the robbery was over, but now he was ensnared in a larger, more dangerous game. The men gave him 48 hours to decide. After they left, Jonathan's mind raced. He could either comply, risking his freedom and morals for a criminal syndicate, or attempt to outwit them and escape entirely. The diary he had destroyed haunted him. Westfall's failure felt like an omen. I see where I went off track. Let's refine the story to focus on Jonathan helping the syndicate while setting up a potential plan to turn things to his advantage. Here's a continuation that aligns with your idea. Jonathan paced his dimly lit workshop, the sound of tools clinking against one another, punctuating the silence. The syndicate had given him no choice. He would have to cooperate. But if he was going to create something for them, he would make sure it served his interest too. With trembling hands, he spread blueprints across the table. The request was clear. Design a device to help the syndicate access high-security systems without leaving a trace. It had to be foolproof, fast, and untraceable, a feat even Westfall had failed to achieve. Jonathan's talent for engineering wasn't in question. He could build what they wanted, but he wouldn't give them something so powerful without a safeguard, one they wouldn't notice until it was too late. 48 hours later, Jonathan stood in the abandoned factory where the syndicate had summoned him. He carried a black case, its contents gleaming under the dim light of flickering overhead lamps. The leader of the syndicate, a sharp-eyed man named Victor, leaned against a rusted beam. His two enforcers loomed nearby, silent and imposing. "Well," Victor drawled, "you've made it." Jonathan opened the case, revealing a sleek device. It was small, no larger than a paperback book, with a matte black finish and a glowing blue interface. "This will do what you need," Jonathan said evenly. "It's the most advanced bypass system ever created. You'll be able to crack any system in under 3 minutes." Victor picked up the device, studying it. "Impressive. I almost thought you'd try something clever." Jonathan met his gaze. "That wouldn't end well for me, would it?" Victor smirked. "No, it wouldn't." The men around him chuckled, but Jonathan stayed silent. He knew the truth. The device worked, but it had a hidden function. Each time it was used, it would silently send encrypted signals to a server Jonathan had set up, logging its location and activity. It was a breadcrumb trail he could use if he needed leverage, or an escape route. Victor nodded approvingly. "You've earned yourself a bit more time, Jonathan. But remember, this isn't over. We'll call you again when we need you." As the syndicate left with the device, Jonathan allowed himself a small exhale. He had bought himself time and planted the seeds for his survival. But as the warehouse doors slammed shut behind him, he knew the clock was ticking. Would they discover the device's hidden function? Would they come back sooner than expected? Jonathan sat alone in his workshop, staring at his encrypted server. The syndicate had grown suspicious, but they hadn't caught on fully yet. He had modified the signal to keep tracking their actions without raising further alarms, but it was only a matter of time before someone like Marco found the deeper encryption. Still, he had logged enough data to paint a damning picture. Timestamps of the syndicate's movements, locations they frequented, and activity patterns. Combined with his knowledge of their operations, he had enough to implicate Victor and his men in several high-level crimes. Jonathan knew he couldn't go to the local police. They were either corrupt or out of their depth when it came to dealing with a syndicate like Victor's. Instead, he reached out to an old acquaintance, Special Agent Claire Donovan of the FBI. Years ago, they had crossed paths during an investigation into black market technology. While they hadn't parted on the best terms, Jonathan knew Claire's integrity was beyond question. He composed a message using an anonymous email service. "Agent Donovan, this is Jonathan Hale. I have actionable intelligence on a criminal syndicate involved in trafficking, extortion, and illegal tech. Attached are encrypted files containing their recent movements and activities. I can provide more details, but I need assurances of safety. They're watching me closely, and one misstep will cost me my life. If you're willing to act, contact me through this secure channel. Time is critical." Jonathan attached a few heavily redacted logs as a teaser of what he had, ensuring it was just enough to catch Claire's interest without revealing his full hand. He hit send and leaned back, the tension in his chest unrelenting. As days passed without a response, Jonathan continued his surveillance. The device's hidden function proved invaluable, logging the syndicate's every move. He documented their transactions, shipments, and even snippets of conversations when the device was active near their operations. Using a high-powered microphone disguised as a common workshop tool, he began secretly recording his own interactions with Victor and his men. Every visit, every threat, every demand, they were all stored on a secure drive buried in a decoy computer he kept in the basement. Jonathan also devised a second layer of protection. If something happened to him, the recordings and data would automatically be sent to multiple news outlets and law enforcement agencies. 3 nights later, Jonathan received a response. The email was brief and direct. "Jonathan, this is Claire Donovan. I've reviewed your files and I believe you. Meet me in person to discuss your safety and the next steps. We need to act fast, but we can't risk digital communication any longer. There's a diner on Route 7, 10 miles north of your location. Be there at 10 p.m. tomorrow. Sit at the corner booth by the window. I'll find you. Do not bring anyone or tell anyone about this meeting." Jonathan felt a mixture of relief and dread. He was one step closer to escaping Victor's grasp. But if the syndicate found out, it would all be over. The next day, Jonathan packed the most critical files onto a portable drive and secured it in a hidden compartment of his jacket. He also programmed his server to begin a mass data upload in 24 hours, just in case something went wrong. Before leaving, he made one final recording of himself. "If you're hearing this, I didn't make it. The attached files will expose everything. Take them to the authorities and don't let Victor's syndicate get away with this." He stored the recording with the rest of his evidence, hoping it wouldn't be needed. At 10 p.m., Jonathan arrived at the nearly empty diner. He sat in the corner booth as instructed, his heart pounding with every second that passed. He watched the door, half expecting Victor or Marco to walk in. Finally, Claire entered. She was dressed casually, but her sharp gaze swept the room before she approached him. "Jonathan," she said, sliding into the booth across from him. "You look like hell." "Thanks," he muttered. "I feel worse." Claire didn't waste time. "The files you sent me are solid. If you've got more, we can build an airtight case against them. But you need to be ready to disappear. This won't end cleanly." Jonathan nodded. "I've got everything we need, but I'm still working with them. They'll notice if I vanish. We need a plan that doesn't blow my cover until the last possible moment." Claire leaned in. "We'll protect you, but you have to trust me. Do you have access to their operations?" Jonathan hesitated. "Through the device they took. It logs their activities, but I need more time to gather enough to expose their entire network." "Time's a luxury we don't have," Claire said. "Get me everything you've got by the end of the week. We'll move in, take them down, and get you out." Jonathan left the diner feeling both reassured and terrified. He was no longer alone, but the risks had grown exponentially. If Victor discovered even a hint of his betrayal, everything would crumble. Back in his workshop, Jonathan doubled down on his recordings, determined to gather as much as possible before the FBI made their move. The clock was still ticking, but now there was a chance he might survive. The following days were a whirlwind of calculated risk for Jonathan. With every passing hour, the weight of his double life grew heavier. The syndicate continued to pressure him for updates and new innovations, while Claire demanded more intel to finalize their plan. Jonathan's nights were sleepless as he worked tirelessly to maintain his cover while feeding critical information to the FBI. Victor wasn't a fool. He sensed something was off with Jonathan. Subtle hesitations, nervous glances, and unexplained absences. During one of their meetings, Victor leaned across the table, his dark eyes locking onto Jonathan's. "You've been quiet, Jonathan," Victor said. "Too quiet. Makes me wonder if you're hiding something." Jonathan forced a laugh. "I'm just trying to focus on my work. That's what you pay me for, isn't it?" Victor didn't smile. "We don't pay you. We own you." He leaned back, his tone sharp. "Remember that." The tension was palpable, but Victor didn't push further. Still, Jonathan knew his leash was tightening. Jonathan knew he had to accelerate his efforts. He spent hours decoding and organizing the data from the device, ensuring it painted a complete picture of the syndicate's operations. One evening, the device transmitted an unexpected signal, a shipment manifest and location for a large weapons deal scheduled in 3 days. It was a golden opportunity for the FBI to strike and take down key players in the syndicate. Jonathan immediately encrypted the data and sent it to Claire. Her response came quickly. "This is perfect. We'll move in during the deal. Keep your head down and stay out of sight. We'll handle the rest." Jonathan wanted to believe her, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something would go wrong. The night of the deal arrived, and Jonathan was summoned to the warehouse. Victor had insisted on his presence to demonstrate the device's capabilities to their buyers. Jonathan couldn't refuse without raising suspicion, so he reluctantly went, knowing he was walking into the lion's den. The warehouse was buzzing with activity. Armed guards patrolled the perimeter, while Victor and Marco oversaw the preparations. A group of buyers dressed in tailored suits stood near the center, speaking in hushed tones. Jonathan stayed close to the device, pretending to run final checks while covertly recording the scene with a hidden camera in his glasses. As the deal reached its climax, the sound of tires screeching outside shattered the tense atmosphere. Seconds later, the warehouse doors burst open, and a team of FBI agents stormed in, shouting orders. "FBI, drop your weapons and get on the ground!" Chaos erupted. Guards opened fire, but the agents were prepared. Flashbangs exploded, disorienting the syndicate's men. Victor grabbed Jonathan by the arm and pulled him behind a stack of crates. "Did you know about this?" Victor hissed, his voice low and dangerous. "No!" Jonathan lied, feigning panic. "I have no idea what's happening." Victor's eyes narrowed, but before he could press further, Marco called out, "Boss, we've got to move." Victor released Jonathan and joined Marco, leaving Jonathan momentarily alone. Seizing the opportunity, Jonathan slipped away from the chaos and headed for a side exit. As he reached the door, he turned back and saw Claire among the agents, her commanding presence cutting through the turmoil. Their eyes met briefly, and she gave him a subtle nod before refocusing on the raid. Jonathan fled into the night, his heart pounding. He knew he couldn't go back to his workshop. It was only a matter of time before Victor connected the dots. Hours later, Jonathan received a message from Claire. "We've arrested key members, but Victor escaped. We have enough evidence to dismantle their operations, but he's still out there. Stay hidden. We'll keep you updated." Jonathan stared at the message, his relief tempered by the knowledge that Victor would stop at nothing to find him. For weeks, Jonathan moved from one safe house to another, always staying a step ahead of both the FBI and the syndicate. He had no real peace, only fleeting moments of quiet in dark corners of unfamiliar places. Every time he checked the news or scrolled through encrypted messages from Claire, the weight of what he'd done and the consequences of his actions weighed heavily on him. He had helped the authorities take down most of the syndicate's major players, but Victor's escape had turned everything upside down. Victor was a shadow, slipping through the cracks, and Jonathan knew he wouldn't rest until he found him. One night, as he settled into yet another temporary hideout, an abandoned apartment in the heart of the city, his phone buzzed. It was Claire. "Jonathan, we need you. We've tracked Victor to a location. This could be it." Jonathan hesitated. Every part of him screamed to remain hidden, to stay safe. But deep down, he knew the syndicate wouldn't stop until they got to him. If he could help bring Victor down, it would finally be over, one way or another. The location was a secluded mansion on the outskirts of the city. Jonathan, with his face hidden under a cap and his eyes scanning the perimeter, approached the property. He had been briefed on the plan. FBI agents were in position, ready to move in once they had enough evidence of Victor's illegal activities. Jonathan's role was simple: be a witness. He'd provide the final piece of the puzzle, proof that Victor was still operating his criminal syndicate from the mansion. But as he neared the front gate, his phone buzzed again. This time it was an encrypted message from Claire. "Victor's expecting you." Jonathan's pulse quickened. The trap had already been set. As he made his way through the grounds, Jonathan felt the weight of the situation bearing down on him. He'd already betrayed the syndicate once, and now Victor was on to him. But there was no turning back. He had to finish what he started. The mansion was eerily quiet. Jonathan crept through the halls, his mind racing. He had been trained to think fast, and now every second counted. He needed to gather more evidence before the FBI moved in. Suddenly, a voice echoed through the hallway. "Jonathan!" Jonathan froze, his breath catching in his throat. He turned and there stood Victor, his expression cold and calculating. "Did you really think you could play both sides?" Victor asked, a smirk curling on his lips. "Did you think I wouldn't find out?" Jonathan's mind scrambled for an answer, but Victor cut him off. "Drop it. I know everything. The FBI, the device, the recordings." Victor's eyes glinted with something dangerous. "But you made one fatal mistake." Jonathan braced himself. "What mistake?" "You thought you could walk away." Victor's men emerged from the shadows, encircling Jonathan. It was over. At that moment, Jonathan heard the sound of helicopters approaching. The FBI had arrived. The agents stormed the mansion, and gunfire erupted as the syndicate's men fought back. Jonathan, in the chaos, found an opportunity to break free. He rushed toward the back exit, desperate to escape the trap Victor had set for him. But as he reached the door, he saw Claire. She was there, holding her weapon steady, eyes locked on him. "Jonathan, no!" she shouted. "You don't have to do this." Jonathan hesitated, torn between his desire to escape and his need to put an end to it all. He saw the agents moving in, and he knew this was his chance. But something in Claire's voice, something in her eyes stopped him. "I'm done running," Jonathan said, his voice shaky but determined. He turned to face Victor, who had been watching the scene unfold with growing anger. "You're finished, Victor," Jonathan said, his hand trembling slightly as he pulled out the final piece of evidence. The encrypted files that would finally bring the syndicate down. Victor was arrested, his operations dismantled piece by piece, and the remaining members of the syndicate were rounded up by the FBI. Jonathan, now under the protection of the agency, finally found some measure of peace. The initial $5 million Jonathan had stolen was a substantial amount of money, and it carried a heavy weight. After the events with the syndicate, Jonathan knew that the stolen money would be a key factor in how things unfolded for him. Once he reached out to the authorities, the first thing they did was trace the stolen money. The $5 million was carefully hidden in various accounts, and some of it had been moved offshore to avoid detection. Jonathan had been smart enough to try to keep it from being immediately traced back to him. But with the help of the agency, they managed to follow the money trail. Despite Jonathan's best efforts to distance himself from the crime, the authorities seized the entire sum. The $5 million was confiscated and became part of the investigation into the syndicate's operations. The stolen funds were eventually used as evidence in the criminal prosecution against the syndicate members, adding significant weight to the charges against them. For Jonathan, this meant that he never saw the money again. The agency had placed him under witness protection, and the stolen funds were considered forfeit as part of his cooperation. In the end, Jonathan didn't gain anything from the theft. He lost the money and his ties to the criminal world. It was a bitter reminder of the life he had tried to leave behind. But ultimately, it was also what helped dismantle the syndicate he had once worked for. Jonathan had initially planned to steal the $5 million with one goal in mind: to escape his past and secure a new life for himself. He had been meticulously planning every step, ensuring that the heist would go off without a hitch. The money, he thought, would be his ticket to freedom, a means to start over without the constant fear of being tied to his criminal past. The clock was ticking, both literally and metaphorically, as he executed the heist. The clock he had set up in his mind was a symbol of urgency, a countdown toward his escape. He had imagined that, once the money was in his hands, he would disappear into the shadows, untraceable and free. But as with most things in life, things didn't go according to plan. What Jonathan hadn't expected was the web of consequences that unraveled after the theft. The syndicate he tried to double-cross was more dangerous than he could have imagined. And the device, the seemingly innocent tool he thought would be his ticket out, turned out to be the very thing that trapped him further. In the end, Jonathan didn't walk away with the money or the freedom he had hoped for. The $5 million he had stolen, instead of being a tool for his liberation, became part of a much larger scheme that ultimately led to his cooperation with the authorities. The clock he had relied on had been ticking, but it wasn't counting down toward his escape. It was counting down toward his reckoning. As Jonathan sat under the protection of the agency, he realized how naive he had been. He hadn't expected it to turn out this way, but he knew he couldn't change the past. The clock had run out, and now the only thing he could do was move forward, knowing that his actions had caught up with him in a way he had never anticipated.